She walked into the hotel lobby in the late afternoon light, her simple linen dress fluttering gently in the air conditioning, pulling a scuffed old suitcase behind her. The front desk staff glanced her up and down, speaking in a stiff, polite voice. "I'm sorry, deliveries go around to the back entrance." When she smiled and said, "My name is Grace Walker. I have a reservation," the entire reception desk froze for a second, then quickly replied coldly, "I'm afraid you don't meet the visual standard of our property." They didn't know. She was the beloved wife of the billionaire who owned the entire hotel chain. Grace stood there, her sandals pressed against the cool marble floor, the faint squeak of her suitcase wheels fading into the hum of the Grand Lux lobby. Chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, casting golden light across gold-trimmed walls, and the air smelled of jasmine and expensive perfume. Gala guests moved through the space like they were on a stage, women in gowns that caught the light like liquid fire, men in tuxes that screamed old money. The receptionist Claire had a tight bun and eyes that judged faster than they blinked. She leaned forward, her voice sugary but sharp. "Hunt, you're probably lost. This is a high-profile event. Service entrances around back." Grace's fingers tightened slightly on the suitcase handle, but her face stayed calm, her brown eyes steady as a still lake. "I'm not lost," she said. "I booked a room through your app." "Check it, please." Claire's smile twitched, and the two staff behind her, a guy with slicked-back hair named Todd and a woman with a pearl necklace named Margaret, exchanged smirks, their whispers slicing through the air. As Claire tapped at her computer, a woman in a sapphire blue gown, her wrists heavy with bracelets, paused by the desk, her perfume sharp enough to sting. She looked Grace up and down, her lips twisting into a sneer. "Oh, darling," she said loud enough for the nearby guests to turn. "This isn't a charity event. You can't just wander in looking like you rolled out of a thrift store." The crowd tittered, and a man in a charcoal suit nearby added, "Maybe she's here to sell us her suitcase." "Vintage, right?" Grace's fingers froze on her bag, her eyes flicking to the woman, then back to the desk. She didn't speak, but her shoulders stiffened and the faintest tremor ran through her hand as she adjusted her grip. The woman in the blue gown laughed, tossing her head, her bracelets jingling like coins. "Someone get her a map to the bus stop," she said, and the laughter swelled, a cold wave that made the chandelier light feel harsh. Grace stood taller, her sandals scuffing the marble, her silence louder than their mockery. Claire shook her head, her lips pursing. "No, Grace Walker. And our rooms start at $200 a night. Maybe you meant the budget motel on Sunset." A couple waiting nearby turned the woman in a red sequined dress clutching a tiny crystal purse, her lips curling as she whispered to her partner, a man in a velvet blazer with a Rolex glinting on his wrist. "She looks like she's here to clean the rooms," the woman said, her voice carrying just enough to sting. The man chuckled, his eyes scanning Grace's plain dress, her unstyled hair, the suitcase with its frayed strap. Grace's jaw tightened, but she didn't glance their way. She reached into her canvas bag, pulled out her phone, and opened an email. "Here's my confirmation," she said, sliding the phone across the counter. Claire barely looked at it before pushing it back, her nails clicking against the screen. "Could be a glitch," she said. "But tonight's gala has a strict aesthetic. You don't fit the brand image." The word "fit" landed like a blade, and the lobby seemed to lean in the air, thickening with attention. Grace's fingers paused on her phone, her shoulders squaring just a fraction, her sandals scuffing faintly as she shifted her weight. "I don't fit," she repeated, her voice soft but clear, like she was making sure the room understood. Claire nodded, her smile now openly smug, her eyes flicking to the crowd for approval. "Exactly. We're curating an experience here. You get it." The man in the velvet blazer snorted, leaning toward his companion, a woman in a gold dress with a diamond choker. "Curating," he said loud enough for everyone nearby. "She's curated for the soup kitchen." A ripple of laughter spread through the guests, their eyes darting to Grace's flat sandals, her lack of jewelry, the way she stood alone. Grace's gaze shifted to him for a moment, her eyes locking onto his, steady and unyielding, then back to Claire. "Check the system again," she said, her tone unchanged, but there was a weight to it now, like a door clicking shut. A concierge in a crisp black vest, his name tag reading Elliot, stepped forward, his voice loud and performative. "Ma'am, you're holding up the line," he said, gesturing to the growing crowd of gala guests. "Let's not make this embarrassing." He reached for her suitcase as if to move it himself, but Grace pulled it back, her fingers firm, her eyes narrowing. "Don't touch my things," she said, her voice low but sharp, cutting through the hum of the lobby. Elliot froze, his hand hovering, then stepped back, his face flushing, as a woman in a silver gown laughed. "Oh, she's feisty," the woman said, her voice dripping with mockery. "What's in that bag?" "Your life savings." The crowd roared, and a man with a slick ponytail added, "Bet it's empty, just like her bank account." Grace's lips pressed into a thin line, her fingers trembling as she zipped her bag shut, the sound sharp in the chaos. She didn't look at them, but her silence felt like a wall, unyielding and cold. Claire sighed, rolling her eyes, her fingers hovering over the keyboard like she was doing Grace a favor. Before she could speak, a woman in a sleek black gown, her hair piled high with a pearl comb, stepped up to the desk, cutting in line. "Claire, darling," she said, her voice loud and syrupy, "can you hurry this up? Some of us have actual reservations." She glanced at Grace, her lips pursing. "This isn't a homeless shelter, sweetheart." The crowd tittered, and Claire's smirk widened. Todd, the guy with the slicked-back hair, leaned forward, adding, "Yeah, maybe try the YMCA down the street." Margaret, the woman with the pearl necklace, covered her mouth, but her laugh was loud enough to echo. Grace's hand rested on her suitcase, her fingers still, but her knuckles were pale. She looked at the woman in the black gown, then at Claire. "I'm not leaving," she said, her voice low but firm. "I have a reservation. Find it." The lobby's noise swelled, but a young bellhop barely out of his teens hesitated near the desk, his eyes flicking to Grace's phone. He stepped forward, his voice quiet, almost drowned out by the crowd. "I can check the backup system," he offered, his hands fumbling with a tablet. Claire shot him a glare, but he typed quickly, his brow furrowing. "There's a reservation here," he said, his voice shaking. "Grace Walker confirmed for tonight." The room stilled for a moment, the laughter fading, but Claire snatched the tablet from him, her face twisting. "That's a mistake," she snapped, shutting the screen off. "She doesn't belong here." The bellhop shrank back, his eyes meeting Grace's for a split second, a flicker of apology in them. Grace nodded slightly, her fingers brushing her phone, her silence a quiet acknowledgement of his attempt, a thread of connection in the cold room. The lobby was a theater now, every eye on Grace, every whisper a spotlight. A teenage girl in a sparkly pink dress, her phone already out, giggled as she snapped a photo. "This is going viral," she said to her friend, a boy in a ill-fitting tux who laughed. "She's like totally clueless." A man with a gray goatee and a pinstripe suit holding a cigar he hadn't lit muttered to his wife, "Some people have no shame crashing a place like this." Grace heard it all, the laughter, the whispers, the clicks of phone cameras. Her face didn't change, but her fingers brushed the edge of her canvas bag where a small, faded photo stuck out, half tucked into a pocket. It was her and Lucas years ago, laughing in a diner, their hands smudged with ink from sketching hotel plans on napkins. She didn't pull it out. She didn't need to. She just stood there, her sandals rooted to the marble, her eyes on Claire. A group of 3 women, their gowns a riot of emerald and ruby, pushed through the crowd, their voices loud and gleeful. The leader, her earrings dangling like chandeliers, pointed at Grace's suitcase. "Is that your only luggage?" she asked, her tone mockingly sweet. "Did you pack your whole closet in there?" "Oh wait, that is your closet." Her friends cackled, one of them fanning herself with a gala program, the paper snapping in the air. "I bet she made that dress herself," the second woman said, her voice cutting. "From a tablecloth?" The third leaned in her breath, smelling of champagne. "Honey, leave before you embarrass yourself more." Grace's hand tightened on her suitcase, her nails digging into the strap, but her face remained calm, her eyes flicking to each woman in turn. "I'm here to check in," she said, her voice steady, each word a quiet defiance. The women laughed, their voices overlapping, drowning her out, the crowd feeding on their cruelty like sharks on blood. Claire typed something, her movements slow and theatrical, then shook her head again. "Still nothing," she said, her voice now openly mocking. "And honestly, even if there was, you don't belong here. Look around." She gestured to the glittering crowd, the chandeliers, the marble floors. "This isn't your scene?" The woman in the red sequined dress laughed, her voice sharp. "She probably thinks this is a Greyhound station," she said to her partner, who nodded, his velvet blazer catching the light. Grace's lips pressed together, but she didn't flinch. She slid her phone back across the counter, the confirmation email still open. "Check the name again," she said, her voice steady, each word deliberate. "Grace Walker." Claire rolled her eyes, but before she could respond, a man in a crisp suit emerged from a side office, his presence cutting through the noise like a cold wind. A guest in a tailored white suit, his cufflinks shaped like tiny crowns, stepped forward, his voice booming with authority. "Enough of this," he said, addressing the crowd like a ringmaster. "She's wasting everyone's time. Someone call security before she ruins the evening." He turned to Grace, his eyes narrowing. "You're not fooling anyone, sweetheart. Take your little act somewhere else." The crowd murmured in agreement, a few clapping their applause sharp and mocking. Grace's fingers trembled as she adjusted her bag, but she met his gaze, her eyes unyielding. "I have a right to be here," she said, her voice low but clear, each word, a stone in the storm. The man laughed, his cufflinks glinting as he waved her off. "Rights. In this lobby, you're out of your league." The crowd's laughter swelled a wave that threatened to drown her, but Grace stood firm, her sandals scuffing the marble, her silence a shield against their venom. His name tag read Mr. Reynolds' manager. He was tall with a face that looked carved from stone, his eyes scanning the scene with the arrogance of someone who'd spent years deciding who belonged. "What's the issue here?" he asked, his voice loud enough to draw every eye in the lobby. Claire straightened, eager to impress, her tight bun gleaming under the lights. "This guest claims she has a reservation, but there's no record and she doesn't meet tonight's event standards," she said, her tone practically gleeful. Reynolds looked Grace over, his gaze lingering on her sandals, her loose hair, the scuffed suitcase. "Ma'am," he said, his voice cold as the marble underfoot, "we're declining service to guests who don't align with the brand's aesthetic tonight. We appreciate your understanding." He gestured toward the glass doors, his hand slicing through the air like a blade. "Please exit through the main entrance." As Reynolds spoke, a woman in a lavender dress, her clutch studded with Swarovski crystals, pushed forward, her voice shrill and cutting. "This is outrageous," she said, addressing the crowd. "I paid thousands for tonight and I have to stand here watching this nobody clog up the lobby." She turned to Grace, her eyes blazing. "Do you know who we are? You're ruining our night." The crowd nodded, their murmurs growing louder, a few shouting, "Get her out." Grace's fingers tightened on her suitcase, her nails digging into her palm, but she didn't look away. "I'm just trying to check in," she said, her voice steady but softer now, like she was speaking to herself. The woman in the lavender dress laughed, her clutch glinting as she waved it. "Check in. You. Look at yourself." The crowd's laughter was a roar now, and Grace's shoulders tensed, her eyes flicking to the glass doors, her silence, a quiet battle against the storm. Grace didn't move right away. She stood there, her suitcase still beside her, the lobby's golden light catching the faint lines of her face, lines that spoke of late nights, hard work, and a life lived quietly but fully. The room was watching now, the air thick with judgment. The woman with the diamond choker leaned toward her husband, whispering, she thought she could just walk in here. The teenage girl kept filming her giggles, sharp and relentless. A man in a navy suit, his cufflinks glinting, muttered to his date, "This is why they need better security." "Letting anyone in?" Grace's hand rested on her phone, her fingers still. Then she spoke, her voice low but firm, cutting through the noise like a blade. "You're refusing me because of how I look." Reynolds blinked, caught off guard by her directness, his polished facade cracking for a split second. "It's policy," he said, quickly recovering. "We maintain a standard." Grace nodded slowly, like she was memorizing his face, his words, the way the room felt. "A standard," she said. 2 words. They hit the lobby like a quiet thunderclap, and for a moment Reynolds' confidence faltered, his hand twitching at his side. A man in a corner, older with a silver cane and a suit that looked older than the hotel, watched Grace silently, his eyes narrowing. He leaned toward a younger man beside him, his voice low but audible. "That's her," he said, his cane tapping the floor. "Grace Walker. I saw her name on the original blueprints for this place." The younger man frowned, shaking his head, but the older man's gaze stayed on Grace, his fingers tightening on his cane. "She's no nobody," he muttered, but the crowd's noise drowned him out and nobody else heard. Grace didn't notice him, her focus on Reynolds, but her hand brushed her bag again, where a small keychain dangled a tiny silver charm shaped like the Grand Lux logo, one of the first prototypes she'd designed with Lucas years ago. The charm caught the light unnoticed by the crowd, a quiet hint of her truths. The security guard appeared next, a broad-shouldered man with a walkie-talkie crackling on his belt, his face set in a practiced frown. "Ma'am, let's go," he said, pointing toward the doors, his voice gruff but not unkind. Grace didn't argue. She picked up her suitcase, the wheels squeaking faintly, and started walking. The crowd parted their eyes, following her like she was a spectacle, their whispers a chorus of cruelty. The teenage girl kept filming her friend, whispering, "She's actually leaving." "This is iconic." The woman in the black gown called out, "Better luck next time, hon." And the laughter swelled sharp and cold. Grace kept her head high, her steps steady, but her knuckles were white around the suitcase handle, her fingers trembling just enough to betray the weight of the moment. Outside, the Beverly Hills sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, the air warm and heavy with the scent of eucalyptus. The valet attendants glanced at her, then looked away, assuming she was nobody. The glass doors slid shut behind her, and the lobby's noise surged back to life as if she'd never existed. As Grace stepped onto the sidewalk, a valet younger than the others, his uniform slightly too big, hesitated. He glanced at her suitcase, then at the lobby, his hands fidgeting. "Ma'am," he said quietly, stepping closer, I saw your name on a staff memo once. You're important, aren't you?" Grace looked at him, her eyes softening, but she didn't speak. She just nodded slightly, her fingers brushing the keychain on her bag, the silver charm glinting in the sunset. The valet's eyes widened, but before he could say more, another valet barked at him to move a car, and he hurried off, casting one last glance at her. Grace stood there, her suitcase at her side, the city's hum, a quiet backdrop to her stillness, her silence, a promise of what was to come. "Hey, before we keep going, can you do me a quick favor? Grab your phone, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. It means everything to share stories like this, stories that hit deep and remind us who we are. I'd love to know you're with me. All right, let's dive back in." Grace stopped on the sidewalk, setting her suitcase down with a soft thud. The hotel's glass facade reflected the luxury cars pulling up, Lamborghinis, Bentleys, a Ferrari with a custom plate that read Kingpin. She took a deep breath, her shoulders relaxing for the first time since she'd walked in, the warm evening air brushing her face. Her fingers brushed the strap of her canvas bag, and she pulled out her phone, dialing a number. When the call connected, her voice was soft, almost amused, but there was an edge to it, like a blade wrapped in velvet. "Hi, love," she said. "They just refused to check me in at Grand Lux. I guess they forgot who pays the building's electric bill." She paused, listening, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just thought you should know." She hung up, slipped the phone back into her bag, and leaned against a lamppost, her eyes fixed on the hotel entrance. The valet attendants were scrambling now, parking a sleek Rolls-Royce, their radios buzzing with urgent chatter, their faces tense. Inside, the gala was in full swing, a glittering machine of wealth and ego. Champagne flutes clinked their bubbles, catching the chandelier light, and a string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner, the notes sharp and delicate. Guests mingled their voices loud with self-importance, their laughter a currency of status. Claire was back at the desk laughing with Todd about that woman with the suitcase. "Can you imagine?" she said, tossing her head, her tight bun gleaming. "Thinking she could just waltz in here looking like that?" Todd grinned, leaning on the counter. "Bet she's still outside crying to her Uber driver." Margaret, the woman with the pearl necklace, shook her head, her voice low but gleeful. "Some people have no self-awareness." Reynolds was across the room, schmoozing with a group of investors, his smile wide, and practiced his hand resting on a glass of bourbon, his eyes scanning the crowd for the next handshake. A waiter balancing a tray of canapes passed by the desk, his eyes flicking to Claire. He paused, his voice low, hesitant. "I heard her name before," he said, glancing toward the doors. "Grace Walker. She's on the board or something, isn't she?" Claire laughed, waving him off, her tight bun bobbing. "Don't be ridiculous, Marco. That woman. She's nobody." The waiter frowned, his tray tilting slightly, but he moved on, his eyes lingering on the glass doors where Grace had disappeared. The crowd didn't notice their laughter drowning out his words, but his hesitation hung in the air, a crack in the facade, a hint of truth waiting to break free. Nobody noticed the valet attendants outside suddenly standing straighter, their radios crackling with urgency. Nobody saw the convoy approaching 5 black cars, 3 Rolls-Royces and 2 Cadillac Escalades, their paint gleaming under the streetlights like polished obsidian. The cars pulled up in perfect formation, their engines a low, powerful hum, and the entire lobby seemed to pause, the air tightening like a held breath. The lead car's door opened, and Lucas Walker stepped out. He was in his early 40s, tall, with a black tux that fit like it was made for him, which it was. His face was calm, but his eyes were steel, cutting through the evening light like a blade. The valet froze, then scrambled to open the hotel's main doors, his hands fumbling with the handle. Lucas walked in, his presence filling the room without a single raised word, his footsteps echoing on the marble. The string quartet faltered, the violinist missing a note, the music stumbling into silence. Guests turned their conversations, trailing off their champagne glasses, tilting in their hands. Claire looked up from the desk, her smile vanishing like smoke, her tight bun suddenly looking too severe. Reynolds, mid-sentence with an investor, stopped talking, his glass slipping slightly, bourbon splashing onto his cuff. Lucas stopped in the center of the lobby, his gaze sweeping the room, taking in every face, every frozen expression. "Who denied service to my wife?" he asked, his voice cool, controlled, but carrying to every corner, each word a stone dropped into a still pond. The silence was deafening, the kind that made your ears ring, the kind that exposed every heartbeat in the room. Claire's hands trembled as she gripped the counter, her nails digging into the wood. Reynolds took a step forward, his face pale, his voice unsteady, cracking under the weight of Lucas's stare. "Mr. Walker, sir, there must be a misunderstanding." Lucas cut him off, his eyes locking onto the manager's, unyielding. "You refused Grace Walker a room. You escorted her out. In front of your guests." It wasn't a question. Reynolds opened his mouth, then closed it, his tie suddenly too tight, his hands twitching at his sides. The woman in the gold dress who'd laughed at Grace earlier clutched her clutch purse, her eyes darting to the exit, her heels clicking as she shifted her weight. The man in the velvet blazer, his Rolex glinting, tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough, his face flushing. Lucas continued, his tone unwavering, each word deliberate. "Effective immediately, all front desk and management staff at this location are suspended pending an internal review of guest relations culture." The words hit like a gavel, final and unappealable. Claire gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her tight bun trembling. Reynolds swayed his bourbon glass, slipping from his hand, shattering on the marble with a sound that made everyone flinch. As Lucas's words echoed, a woman in the back. Her gown, a deep emerald, dropped her glass, the crystal shattering on the floor. She'd been silent until now, but her face was pale, her hands shaking as she whispered to her companion, "I know her. Grace. She signed my contract years ago." Her companion frowned, but the woman's eyes were wide, her fingers clutching her necklace, the emeralds glinting like her fear. "She's not just his wife," she said, her voice barely audible. "She's the one who built this place." The whisper spread a ripple through the crowd, but it was too late. The room already shifting under Lucas's presence, the truth dawning like a sunrise nobody could ignore. Lucas turned his eyes, finding Grace outside through the glass doors, her silhouette framed by the sunset, her linen dress catching the last light. He walked toward her, the crowd parting without a word, their eyes dropping to the floor, their whispers silenced. When he reached her, he didn't speak at first. He just took her suitcase, his fingers brushing hers, warm and steady, and offered her his arm. Grace looked at him, her face softening, her brown eyes catching his, a quiet understanding passing between them. She slipped her arm through his, her sandals scuffing softly as they walked back inside together. The lobby so quiet you could hear the faint squeak of her suitcase wheels, a sound that seemed to echo louder than the quartet ever had. Lucas led her to the elevator, pressed the button for the top floor, and handed her a keycard, its surface smooth and cool. "The presidential suite." He said, his voice low, warm like a promise. "You designed it. You named it. It's yours." Grace's lips curved into a small smile, her fingers closing around the key, her thumb brushing its edge. The elevator doors closed, and the lobby exhaled, the tension breaking into 100 whispered conversations, the air buzzing with shock and shame. The woman in the red sequined dress was already on her phone, her face flushed as she scrolled through X, where the story was starting to spread, hashtags like Grand Lux Scandal popping up like sparks. The man in the velvet blazer was trying to laugh it off, but his voice was shaky, his hand gripping his drink too tightly, the ice clinking nervously. The teenage girl who'd taken the photo was now frantically deleting it, her hands trembling as her friend whispered, "You're gonna get canceled for this, Sophie." The woman in the black gown, her pearl comb glinting, stood frozen, her champagne glass forgotten in her hand, her eyes darting to the exit. Nobody met anyone else's eyes. The guests who'd mocked Grace, who'd laughed and whispered and filmed, were suddenly very interested in their drinks, their shoes, the wallpaper, anything but each other. The string quartet started playing again, but the music felt hollow, like it was trying to cover a wound that wouldn't close the notes, thin and unsteady. As the elevator hummed, a cleaning staff member, her uniform pressed but her hands worn, watched from a corner, her eyes on the closed doors. She'd seen Grace's name on old staff records tucked away in a binder nobody checked anymore. "That's Missy Walker," she whispered to a coworker, her voice trembling with awe. "She approved my hiring years ago. Never forgot her name." The coworker frowned, but the woman's eyes shone, her hands clasping together, a quiet pride in her voice. The crowd didn't hear their whispers focused on Lucas, but the cleaning staff member stood straighter, her gaze fixed on the elevator, a silent cheer for the woman who'd just reclaimed her place. The next morning, Grace woke up in the presidential suite, the sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the room in soft gold. She stood by the glass, looking out at Beverly Hills, the city sprawling below like a map of dreams and ambition. Her simple linen dress was folded on a chair, replaced by a clean linen shirt and pants, their fabric soft against her skin. Her suitcase sat in the corner, still scuffed, still hers, its frayed strap catching the light. Downstairs, the lobby was quieter than usual, the air heavy with the weight of the night before. New staff had been brought in overnight, their faces nervous but polite, their name tags gleaming like they'd been polished for the occasion. The headlines were breaking online. The woman with the old suitcase. The hotel tycoon's wife who made an empire. Bow down. X was buzzing. Blogs were picking it up, and the gala guests were scrambling to distance themselves from the story. A grainy video taken by someone in the crowd was going viral. Grace's calm face, her steady voice the moment Lucas walked in, his presence shifting the room like a tide. Claire was fired by noon, her tight bun undone as she left the hotel. Her LinkedIn profile, once full of proud posts about her job at Grand Lux, going silent. Her last post, a photo of her at the front desk, now buried under comments calling her out. Reynolds was suspended indefinitely, his name trending for all the wrong reasons. His polished arrogance reduced to a single X post from a former colleague, Karma's real. The woman in the gold dress, a minor influencer named Vanessa, lost her sponsorship with a luxury skincare brand after her comments at the gala were quoted in a viral blog post, her follower count dropping by the thousands overnight. The man in the velvet blazer, a hedge fund manager named Derek, found his invitations to high society events quietly drying up, his name whispered in boardrooms as a cautionary tale. The teenage girl Sophie faced a storm of backlash online after her photo surfaced, her parents pulling her from social media entirely, her sparkly pink dress now a reminder of a mistake she couldn't undo. Nobody said it was because of Grace. Nobody had to. The truth had a way of catching up like a tide that didn't need to rush, steady and inevitable. Grace didn't read the headlines. She didn't check her phone for the viral posts, the comments, the hashtags. She sat in the suite sipping coffee, her hands steady around the mug, the steam curling in the sunlight. Lucas joined her, his tux replaced by a simple sweater, his hair slightly mussed, his eyes soft as he looked at her. He didn't talk about the night before, and neither did she. They just sat together, the city humming below them, the silence between them warm and easy, like a blanket shared on a cold night. She'd never needed to prove herself to him. He'd known who she was from the beginning, not just the co-founder of Grand Lux, not just the woman who'd helped build an empire, but Grace. The woman who wore linen dresses and carried an old suitcase because it still worked, because it was hers, because it carried her story. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.